The small family-owned Italian restaurant on the corner of West and Pine had been a neighborhood fixture for over 30 years. The warm glow of its windows spilled out onto the dark street, a beacon of comfort on this particularly chilly November evening. Inside, the rich scents of garlic, tomato sauce, and freshly baked bread filled the air as dinner service hit its peak. Sophia, the restaurant's owner, moved between tables with practiced ease. At 58, she had the kind of face that told stories, laugh lines around her eyes, a determined set to her jaw, and eyes that missed nothing. She'd taken over the restaurant from her parents 15 years ago, keeping alive the recipes and traditions they'd brought with them from the old country. "More bread for table 7, she called over her shoulder to Tino, her nephew who worked as a busboy on weekends to help pay for college. The restaurant buzzed with the pleasant hum of conversation, the clink of silverware and occasional bursts of laughter. The front door opened, bringing with it a rush of cold air and a man Sophia had never seen before. She paused, order pad in hand, and watched as he hesitated in the doorway. He wasn't what anyone would call a typical customer for her modest but respectable establishment. The stranger looked to be in his mid-30s, though it was hard to tell for sure. His brown hair hung long and untamed, partly hidden under a worn beanie that had once been blue. His face was weathered with several days' worth of stubble, but his eyes, they were different. Clear and focused, almost startlingly bright against his otherwise disheveled appearance. His coat was too thin for the November chill, frayed at the cuffs and missing a button. The jeans he wore had seen better days, and his boots were held together with what looked like duct tape on one side. Sophia had been in business long enough to spot trouble, but something about this man didn't trigger her usual alarms. He wasn't drunk or aggressive, just tired and, if she had to guess, hungry. Still, she approached cautiously. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone professional but reserved. The man's gaze wandered past her to the far corner of the restaurant where an upright piano sat gathering dust. The instrument had belonged to Sophia's mother, who used to play on Sunday afternoons. After she passed, no one had the heart to get rid of it, but no one played it either. It had become more of a display piece, often holding stacks of extra napkins or menus. The man started, then cleared his throat. His voice was rough from disuse. "I noticed your piano." Sophia raised an eyebrow. Not what she'd expected him to say. "It's not in use," she replied flatly. The man's shoulders hunched slightly as if bracing himself. "Can I play for some food?" The question hung in the air between them. Sophia studied him more carefully. His hands, she noticed, were surprisingly clean given his overall appearance, with long fingers and neatly trimmed nails. "A musician's hands, perhaps, you play?" she asked, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. He nodded. Just once, a simple dip of his chin. "I do." Sophia had encountered her fair share of street performers over the years. Some were quite talented, while the last thing she needed was someone banging away discordantly during the dinner rush. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated, as if the question required deep thought. "Ben," he finally said, a simple name. She wondered if it was his real one. The logical thing would be to turn him away. Kindly, of course, maybe offer him a sandwich to go. That's what her head told her. But there was something in his eyes, a quiet dignity that spoke to her. "One song," she said firmly. "If it's good, you get dinner. If not..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Relief washed over his face, followed quickly by something else. Nervousness? Fear? It was gone before she could identify it. "Thank you," he said softly. Sophia gestured toward the piano. "It hasn't been tuned in years," she warned. Ben nodded again and made his way through the restaurant. A few diners glanced up curiously as he passed, but most remained absorbed in their meals and conversations. Sophia followed a few steps behind, curious despite herself. She quickly moved a stack of napkins and a vase from the piano top, wiping away a thin layer of dust with her apron. Ben stood before the instrument for a long moment, his eyes closed. He removed his beanie, revealing more of his unruly hair, and tucked it into his coat pocket. Then, with a reverence that caught Sophia by surprise, he pulled out the bench and sat down. His fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. Sophia noticed how thin his wrists were, how the bones stood out sharply. When was the last time he'd eaten a proper meal? The thought came unbidden, bringing with it a pang of sympathy. Then he began to play. The first notes were tentative, testing. He winced at the slightly out-of-tune quality but continued. Within moments, his hands moved more confidently and a melody emerged, something classical that Sophia vaguely recognized. It was as if someone had flipped a switch. The hunched, uncertain man disappeared, replaced by someone who knew exactly what he was doing, whose body moved with purpose and precision. His back straightened, his shoulders relaxed, and his hands, those hands that it seemed to belong to, someone else entirely, flew over the keys with a grace that took Sophia's breath away. The restaurant hadn't gone silent, not yet, but heads were beginning to turn. Tino had stopped mid-step, a basket of bread forgotten in his hands. Sophia found herself unable to move, rooted to the spot as the music swelled. Ben's face had transformed as well. Gone was the weathered, guarded expression. His eyes were closed, brow furrowed in concentration, lips occasionally moving as if he was speaking to himself, or to the music. There was pain there, but also something else. Pure, undiluted joy. The piece built gradually, gaining complexity and speed. Despite the piano's imperfections, the music soared. Sophia didn't know much about classical piano, but she knew enough to recognize extraordinary talent when she heard it. This wasn't street performer good. This was concert hall good. By now, conversations throughout the restaurant had died down. A waiter stood frozen, plates balanced on his arm, unwilling to make the noise of setting them down. Even the kitchen staff had appeared in the doorway, drawn by the unexpected performance. As Ben reached what seemed to be the climax of the piece, his whole body moved with the music. His fingers struck the keys with confidence one moment, then caressed them gently the next. The dynamics of soft and loud, fast and slow created a story without words, a story of loss and hope, struggle and triumph. When the final notes faded, the restaurant remained silent for 3 heartbeats. Then, as if awakening from a shared dream, the room erupted in applause. Ben's eyes snapped open, looking almost surprised to find himself sitting at a piano in a crowded restaurant. The transformation reversed. His shoulders curved inward again, his expression became guarded, and he seemed to physically shrink under the attention. Sophia was the first to approach him, still processing what she'd just witnessed. Words failed her. That wasn't just good, that was incredible. Ben looked up at her, a flush spreading across his hollow cheeks. "Thank you for letting me play," he said quietly. "Where did you learn to play like that?" She couldn't help asking. A shadow crossed his face. "A long time ago," was all he said. More diners had gathered around now, offering compliments and questions. Ben answered politely but briefly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. One older gentleman pressed a $20 bill into his hand, which Ben tried to refuse until the man insisted. Sophia cleared her throat loudly. "All right, everyone, let's give him some space. Back to your meals, please." As the crowd dispersed, she turned to Ben. "I think you've more than earned your dinner. What would you like?" He looked surprised at the question, as if he hadn't actually expected to be fed. "Anything warm," he said. "I'm not picky." Sophia nodded. "I'll bring you our best." And she hesitated. "Would you consider playing another song?" "After you've eaten?" Something flickered in Ben's eyes. Hope, perhaps. "I could do that," he said. Sophia patted his shoulder gently. "Eat first, then play. The piano isn't going anywhere." As she walked back to the kitchen to prepare a plate for their unexpected guest, Sophia found herself glancing back at the man still seated at the piano. He was running his fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them down, as if reacquainting himself with old friends. There was a story there, a big one. And Sophia had a feeling that tonight's impromptu performance was just the beginning. Sophia returned from the kitchen carrying a tray loaded with food, a steaming bowl of homemade minestrone soup, a plate of fettuccine with her grandmother's secret sauce, garlic bread still warm from the oven, and a small salad dressed with olive oil and balsamic vinegar. The smell alone was enough to make Ben's eyes widen. "Eat," she said simply, placing the feast before him. "You need your strength." Ben stared at the food as if it might disappear. "This is too much," he said quietly. "Nonsense. Artists need fuel." Sophia gestured to the piano. "That old thing hasn't sounded that good in 20 years. You've earned every bite." She pulled up a chair nearby as Ben carefully unfolded his napkin and placed it on his lap. a small gesture that spoke of better days and proper upbringing. Sophia noticed how he held his fork, with the natural grace of someone who once knew formal dining etiquette. Yet he ate with the controlled restraint of a person who hadn't seen a proper meal in too long, savoring each bite, but careful not to seem too eager. "How long has it been since you played?" Sophia asked after he'd had a few mouthfuls. Ben swallowed carefully before answering. "On a real piano? 3 years, 2 months. The precision of his answer suggested the date was significant. "And before that?" His eyes clouded. "Every day, since I was 4. Sophia nodded, pieces starting to fit together in her mind. That wasn't just playing. That was something else. Ben focused on his soup, avoiding her gaze. "Music was my life. Now it's just memories." A comfortable silence fell between them as he continued eating. Sophia didn't press further, sensing the weight behind his words. Around them, the restaurant had returned to its normal rhythm of conversation and clinking dishes, though many diners still glanced curiously in Ben's direction. Halfway through his meal, Ben paused. "The piano needs tuning," he said almost apologetically. "The middle C is sharp and the B-flat key sticks." Sophia laughed softly. "I wouldn't know the difference. My mother was the musician, not me. She used to play every Sunday after church." "Italian songs?" Ben asked. "Yes! How did you know?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "The sheet music in the bench. I peeked before I played. There's some Puccini in there." Before Sophia could respond, the front door of the restaurant swung open, bringing in another gust of cold air and a tall, stooped man with silver hair and a cane. Sophia immediately stood up. "Papa, what are you doing downstairs? It's too cold for your joints." The elderly man waved away her concern. "I heard music," he said simply, his accent still thick despite decades in America. His eyes, sharp despite his 82 years, fixed on Ben. "You're the one who played?" Ben nodded, suddenly looking uncomfortable under the older man's scrutiny. "Play again," the old man commanded, pulling out a chair and sitting down heavily. "Papa." "Let him finish eating," Sophia protested. "No, it's okay," Ben said, wiping his mouth with the napkin. "I don't mind." He rose from the table and returned to the piano bench. This time there was less hesitation. His fingers found the keys like they were coming home after a long journey. He paused for just a moment, then began to play something entirely different from his first piece, slower, more contemplative, filled with a gentle sadness that seemed to float through the restaurant. Sophia's father leaned forward in his chair, eyes wide with recognition. A few notes in, he gasped softly. "Debussy," he whispered. "Clair de Lune." The piece unfurled like a moonlit night, Ben's fingers coaxing every ounce of emotion from the imperfect instrument. Even with its flaws, the old piano sang under his touch. This time, the entire restaurant fell silent within moments. Waiters stopped mid-stride, diners put down their forks, and the kitchen staff emerged once again to listen. Ben played differently now, with more confidence. Perhaps it was the food, or perhaps it was simply reconnecting with something he'd been missing for so long. His body swayed gently with the music, his eyes closed, a look of peaceful concentration on his face. In those moments, the shabby clothes and worn appearance faded away. All that existed was the music and the man creating it. Sophia watched her father's face. Tears had formed in the old man's eyes, though he made no move to wipe them away. He hadn't been downstairs to the restaurant in weeks, his arthritis keeping him confined to the apartment above. Yet here he was, drawn by the music like a moth to flame. As the final notes of Clair de Lune faded, there was that same magical pause, a collective held breath, before the applause erupted, louder this time. Several diners rose to their feet. Ben's cheeks flushed with color, but he seemed less startled by the reaction now. He nodded slightly in acknowledgement before returning to his meal. Sophia's father didn't applaud. Instead, he studied Ben with an intensity that made the younger man shift uncomfortably. "Where did you study?" the old man asked abruptly. Ben hesitated. "Eastman." "Then Juilliard." A murmur rippled through the nearby tables. Juilliard was a name even non-musicians recognized. The most prestigious music school in the country, perhaps the world. "I knew it," the old man said, satisfaction in his voice. "You don't play like that without training. And not just any training." He thumped his cane once on the floor for emphasis. "What's your name, son?" "Ben," he replied, the same simple answer he'd given Sophia. Your full name, the old man pressed. Ben's knuckles whitened around his fork. Just Ben is fine. Sophia placed a gentle hand on her father's arm. Papa, let him eat in peace. The old man grunted but relented. Fine, fine. But when you're done, I want to hear Chopin. The nocturne in E-flat major. My Angelina played it at our wedding. Sophia rolled her eyes. Papa, you can't just demand— I know it, Ben interrupted softly. I'd be happy to play it for you, sir. The old man nodded, satisfied, and settled back in his chair to wait. As Ben returned to his meal, Sophia noticed something had changed in his demeanor. There was still wariness there, but also something else. A spark that hadn't been present when he first walked through the door. Each time he played, it was as if pieces of him were gradually coming back to life. Word spread quickly through the small restaurant. Customers who had been preparing to leave decided to order dessert instead. Those waiting for tables were content to stand by the bar area. Someone had taken a video on their phone and was showing it to newcomers. The buzz of excitement was palpable. Tino, Sophia's nephew, slid up beside her. Who is this guy? He whispered. For real? Sophia shook her head. I don't know yet, but Papa seems to think he's something special. He is, Tino insisted. I mean, I don't know anything about classical music, but even I can tell this isn't normal. It's like when you see those videos of random people doing amazing things in public, except it's happening right here. As Ben finished his meal, a young couple approached his table. The woman spoke hesitantly. Excuse me, but our first dance at our wedding was to Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Would it be too much to ask? Ben looked up surprised. First movement? The woman nodded eagerly. I haven't played it in a while, he said, but I'll try. He returned to the piano for a third time. By now, a small crowd had gathered around the instrument. Sophia had to ask people to step back to give him room. The restaurant had become an impromptu concert hall, with Ben as the reluctant star. The haunting opening notes of the Moonlight Sonata filled the room. The young couple stood close together, arms around each other, eyes closed. Other diners watched in silent appreciation. Sophia's father leaned heavily on his cane, nodding in time with the music. Ben played with a different energy now, more assured, as if each piece was helping him reclaim a part of himself that had been lost. His technique was flawless, but it was the emotion he conveyed that held everyone spellbound. This wasn't just skilled playing. This was storytelling without words. As the piece concluded, the young woman wiped tears from her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. It was perfect. Others began to make requests. Ben fulfilled as many as he could remember. Everything from Bach to Gershwin. For over an hour, the piano that had sat silent for years became the heartbeat of the restaurant. Sophia stopped taking new customers, allowing those already inside to stay and listen for as long as they wished. Throughout it all, Sophia's father remained fixed in his chair, watching Ben with eyes that missed nothing. When there was finally a lull in the requests, the old man thumped his cane again. Now, he said firmly, the Chopin. Ben nodded and took a deep breath. When he began to play the nocturne, it was with a tenderness that seemed to reach across time itself. Sophia watched her father close his eyes, his weathered face softening with memories of his beloved wife. In that moment, as the music wove its spell around the restaurant, Sophia made a decision. Whatever Ben's story was, however he had ended up asking to play for food on this cold November night, she was now part of it. And she would do whatever she could to help him find his way back from wherever he had been lost. By the time the restaurant closed at 11, Ben had played for nearly 3 hours straight. His fingers should have been aching, but instead they felt more alive than they had in years. It was as if they'd been asleep and tonight they'd finally awakened. The last customers had left reluctantly, several pressing cash into Ben's hands despite his protests. A small pile of bills sat on top of the piano. Not a fortune, but more money than he'd seen in months. Sophia's father, who had introduced himself as Angelo, remained seated nearby, watching Ben with a gaze that seemed to see far more than Ben was comfortable sharing. Sophia bustled around, clearing tables and counting the night's earnings. Her nephew Tino had gone home an hour ago, having classes in the morning. The kitchen staff had finished cleaning up and departed as well, leaving just the three of them in the warmly lit restaurant. So, Angelo said, breaking the comfortable silence, What happened? Ben's hand stilled on the keys. What do you mean? A man with your talent doesn't end up playing for food unless something happened. The old man's tone wasn't unkind, just matter of fact. I've been around long enough to know talent isn't always enough. Ben closed the piano lid gently, buying time to compose himself. He'd been asked variations of this question countless times over the past 3 years, usually with pity or morbid curiosity. Angelo's straightforward approach was almost refreshing. Life happened, Ben finally said. Bad choices, bad luck, bad timing. Papa, don't interrogate him, Sophia called from across the restaurant. It's been a long night. Angelo waved a dismissive hand at his daughter. I'm not interrogating. I'm conversing. He turned back to Ben. You were going to be somebody, yes? In the music world, Ben stared at his hands. They were thinner than they used to be, but still capable. Still his. I was somebody, he corrected quietly. For a while. Sophia approached, wiping her hands on a towel. You must be exhausted. Where are you staying tonight? The question hung in the air. Ben shifted uncomfortably. I've got a place, he said vaguely. Angelo snorted. A bench in the park is not a place. Papa, Sophia scolded. What? Am I wrong? Angelo challenged, looking directly at Ben. Ben met the old man's eyes. There was something about Angelo that made lying seem pointless. It's a shelter on Wilson Avenue, he admitted. But I'm late for check-in. Sophia glanced at her watch and frowned. It's past 11. Won't they have closed the doors? Ben nodded, resigned. There's an all-night diner near the train station. They let people sit if they buy coffee. Ridiculous, Angelo declared. He thumped his cane on the floor decisively. You'll stay here. Ben blinked in surprise. I couldn't. We have a small room upstairs, Sophia explained, though she looked as startled by her father's declaration as Ben felt. It's nothing fancy, just a bed and a dresser, but it's warm. Why would you do that? Ben asked, genuinely confused. You don't know me. Angelo leaned forward. I know enough. You play like an angel but look like you've been through hell. Whatever happened to you, it doesn't erase what you are. And what's that? Ben asked, a hint of bitterness creeping into his voice. A musician, Angelo said simply. One who hasn't played in too long. Sophia touched her father's shoulder gently. Papa, let me talk to Ben alone for a minute. Angelo grunted but pushed himself up with his cane. Fine, my old bones need rest anyway. But don't let him say no. Musicians are stubborn. They need to be told what's good for them. He nodded firmly at Ben. We'll talk more tomorrow. After Angelo had made his slow way up the back stairs, Sophia sat down across from Ben. My father doesn't offer our guest room to just anyone, she said quietly. Actually, he's never offered it to anyone before. Ben ran a finger along the edge of the piano. Why me? Sophia considered the question. The music, yes, but I think it's more than that. He sees something in you that reminds him of, I'm not sure. Maybe himself when he was younger. She paused. Before he met my mother, he was a violin player in a small orchestra in Italy. Not famous, but respected. He gave it up to come to America and open this restaurant with her. Does he regret it? Ben asked. Sophia smiled. He says no. The restaurant gave him a family, a purpose. But there's always been a part of him that wonders what if. I think when he hears you play, he hears all the talent he once had but never fully used. Ben absorbed this. I don't want charity. It's not charity, Sophia insisted. Think of it as an exchange. You brought music back to this place tonight. Do you have any idea what that means to him? To hear those songs my mother used to play? She gestured around the restaurant. Look what happened here tonight. People who came for pasta stayed for Chopin. When was the last time that happened in a neighborhood Italian restaurant? Ben couldn't help the small smile that tugged at his lips. Probably never. Exactly. So stay tonight. And maybe, she hesitated, maybe we can figure something out. The piano hasn't been played in years. It needs someone who understands it. The offer hung between them. Ben looked at the money on top of the piano. Enough for a few nights in a cheap motel, but then what? Back to the streets, the shelters, the constant uncertainty. The thought of playing again, of having a warm place to sleep, was almost too good to be true. Just tonight, he said finally, and then we'll see. Sophia nodded, seemingly satisfied with this compromise. The bathroom's upstairs, first door on the left if you want to clean up. I'll show you the room. The room was small but clean, with a twin bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a wooden dresser, and a small window that overlooked the street. It had probably been a storage room at some point, but someone had made an effort to make it homey. "Towels are in the bathroom cabinet," Sophia said. "There's a spare toothbrush in there too, still in the package. Never know when you might need one." "Thank you," Ben said, the words feeling inadequate. "For everything." Sophia paused at the door. "Can I ask you something?" Ben nodded cautiously. "Your real name? It's not Ben, is it?" He stiffened slightly. "Why do you say that? The way you hesitated when I asked. The way you say it like you're trying it on for size." She shrugged. "It doesn't matter. You can be whoever you want here." After she left, Ben sat on the edge of the bed, running his hands over the soft quilt. When was the last time he'd slept in a real bed? 2 weeks ago at the shelter. But they'd been so crowded he'd ended up on a cot. Before that, he couldn't remember. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a tattered wallet. Most of the cards and ID had been sold or stolen long ago. But he'd kept one thing, a faded photograph of himself in a tuxedo, standing beside a gleaming concert grand piano. He barely recognized the confident young man with the neat haircut and bright eyes. That had been taken the night of his debut with the Philadelphia Symphony Orchestra, 6 years ago. Before everything fell apart. "Benjamin Reynolds," he whispered to himself, testing the name that had once been his. Not Ben. Benjamin, a name that had appeared on concert programs and CD covers. A name that music critics had once called the most promising young pianist of his generation. He tucked the photo away and moved to the window. The street below was quiet now, a few cars passing occasionally, their headlights sweeping across the buildings. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed briefly before fading. Benjamin, not Ben, touched his fingers to the glass. They still tingled from playing tonight, muscle memory awakening after too long dormant. The feeling terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. For 3 years he'd avoided pianos as much as possible, convinced that playing would only remind him of everything he'd lost. But tonight had shown him something else, that perhaps music could also remind him of everything he still had. A quote from one of his old teachers floated into his mind. "Music isn't just what we do, it's who we are. Even in silence, we carry melodies within us." For the first time in years, Benjamin allowed himself to wonder if perhaps the melodies he'd carried in silence for so long might finally be ready to be heard again. Benjamin woke to sunlight streaming through the small window. For a moment he didn't know where he was. The softness of the bed, the clean smell of the sheets, these weren't part of his normal mornings. Then the memories of the previous night flooded back. The restaurant, the piano, Sophia and Angelo, the music that had poured from his fingers after years of silence. He sat up slowly, his body stiff but rested. A glance at the small clock on the dresser showed it was just past 9. He couldn't remember the last time he'd slept so deeply or for so long. The sounds of movement came from elsewhere in the apartment, cupboards opening and closing, the clatter of dishes, the rich smell of coffee brewing. Benjamin ran a hand through his hair, suddenly self-conscious about his appearance. Last night, in the dim light of the restaurant, perhaps his shabby state hadn't been so obvious. But in the harsh morning light, a gentle knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Yes?" he called, his voice rough with sleep. Sophia's voice came through the door. "Good morning. There's coffee and breakfast when you're ready. And," she paused, "I put some clothes outside the door. They might be big on you, but they're clean." "They were my husband's." Benjamin hesitated. "Your husband won't mind?" There was a brief silence. "He's been gone 5 years, cancer. The clothes are just sitting in boxes anyway." "I'm sorry," Benjamin said, meaning it. "It's okay. Just thought you might want something fresh to wear. No pressure. Come down when you're ready." Her footsteps retreated. Benjamin crossed to the door and opened it cautiously. A neatly folded stack of clothes sat on the floor. Jeans, a flannel shirt, thick socks, even a package of new underwear with the store tag still attached. The simple kindness of it made his throat tight. After washing up in the small bathroom, he changed into the offered clothes. The jeans were a bit loose and the shirt a bit boxy, but they were warm and clean. He looked at himself in the mirror, still thin, still pale, but somehow more human than he'd looked in months. Downstairs, he found Sophia in the restaurant kitchen, preparing for the day. Angelo sat at a small table in the corner reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. "Ah, our musician is awake," Angelo announced, looking up. Good, the bread is fresh. Sophia turned from the stove. How did you sleep? Better than I have in a long time, Benjamin admitted. Thank you. She smiled and gestured to an empty chair. Sit. Eat. The breakfast was simple but hearty: scrambled eggs, toast, sliced tomatoes with olive oil and herbs. Benjamin ate slowly, savoring each bite. Real food, 2 meals in a row. It seemed like a miracle. Angelo watched him over the rim of his coffee cup. You play Chopin like you know him personally, the old man said abruptly. Benjamin looked up, surprised. He was my specialty. At Juilliard, I knew it. Angelo slapped the table triumphantly. Sophia, didn't I say so? The phrasing, the emotion, that doesn't come from just practice. It comes from understanding. Sophia rolled her eyes good-naturedly. Yes, Papa, you're very perceptive. She turned to Benjamin. He's been talking about your playing since he woke up. I think he's your biggest fan. Angelo scoffed. Not fan, appreciator. There's a difference. A small smile tugged at Benjamin's lips. The old man's enthusiasm was infectious. So, Sophia said, sitting down with her own cup of coffee. What's your plan for today? The question caught Benjamin off guard. Plan? When had he last had the luxury of making plans? For years, his days had been consumed with basic survival. Finding food, finding shelter, avoiding trouble. I don't know, he admitted. Angelo snorted. The plan is obvious. The piano needs tuning. You said so yourself. Sophia shot her father a look. Papa, we can't ask him to— I can do it, Benjamin interrupted. Both Sophia and Angelo turned to him in surprise. Tune the piano, I mean. I used to do it myself sometimes. It saves money when you're a student. See? Angelo said triumphantly. The man has skills. Sophia looked uncertain. We'd pay you, of course. Benjamin shook his head. For a place to sleep and 2 meals? I'd say we're even. He hesitated. Unless you'd let me play again tonight. The word surprised even him. After years of avoiding pianos, suddenly he was asking permission to play. But last night had awakened something he'd tried to bury. A hunger that had nothing to do with food. Sophia's expression softened. Of course. The customers would love it. And you'll stay another night, Angelo added firmly. It wasn't a question. Benjamin wanted to protest, to insist he couldn't impose. But the thought of returning to the streets, to the shelters, to the constant state of anxiety that had been his life for so long. If you're sure it's not too much trouble. Trouble? Ha! Angelo waved a dismissive hand. You know how many people called this morning? 5. 5 people called to ask if the piano man would be playing again tonight. Sophia had to put a sign in the window. Sophia looked slightly embarrassed. I hope that's okay. I just said live piano music tonight because I didn't want to presume. It's fine, Benjamin assured her, touched by her consideration. I'd like to play again. After breakfast, Benjamin set to work on the piano. Sophia provided him with a basic toolkit and left him alone in the restaurant while she and Angelo went to the market for supplies. The solitude felt peaceful rather than lonely. He removed the front panel of the upright piano and examined its inner workings. The instrument was old but well made, a Steinway from the 1940s that had been built to last. It needed more than just tuning. Some of the felts were worn and a few hammers needed adjustment, but Benjamin lost himself in the familiar process. His fingers, once trained for the keyboard, now carefully tightened strings and adjusted pins, his ear catching subtle changes in pitch that most people would miss. He was so absorbed in the work that he didn't notice the young man watching him through the restaurant window until a knock made him look up. It was Tino, Sophia's nephew, holding a phone in his hand and looking excited. Sorry to interrupt, Tino said when Benjamin let him in, but you have to see this. He thrust his phone at Benjamin. On the screen was a video. Shaky at first, then steadying to show Benjamin at the piano the night before playing Chopin's Nocturne. The video had clearly been taken by one of the diners. It's got over 30,000 views, Tino said, his voice filled with awe. Someone posted it last night and it's blowing up. People are sharing it everywhere. Benjamin stared at the screen, his stomach dropping. There he was, clearly visible, playing with all the emotion and skill he'd tried to hide from the world for 3 years. The comments scrolled past as Tino flipped through them. Who is this guy? Incredible talent. Where is this restaurant? I need to hear him live. This can't be real. No way a homeless guy plays like that. Wait, is that Benjamin Reynolds? The pianist who disappeared? That last comment made his blood run cold. Someone had recognized him. The carefully constructed anonymity of the past 3 years was beginning to crumble. "You okay?" Tino asked, noticing Benjamin's pallor. "I thought you'd be happy. You're like internet famous now." "I'm fine," Benjamin lied, handing back the phone. "Just surprised," Tino grinned. "Aunt Sophia's phone has been ringing nonstop. People wanting reservations for tonight. We're totally booked and there's a waiting list." The news should have been exciting, but all Benjamin felt was panic. He'd spent years hiding from his old life, from the questions, from the pitying looks and whispered comments. He'd been Benjamin Reynolds, rising star. Then he'd been Benjamin Reynolds, tragic case. Now he was just Ben, anonymous street musician. Or he had been until last night. After Tino left, Benjamin sat at the piano bench, his hands trembling slightly. He should leave, pack up the small bundle of possessions he still owned, and disappear before anyone else recognized him. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. Instead, his fingers found the keys and began to play, softly at first, then with growing confidence. Debussy's Clair de Lune, the same piece he'd played last night. The music flowed through him, both familiar and new. As the final notes faded, he made his decision. He couldn't run forever. Maybe it was time to stop trying. 6 months had passed since the night Benjamin had walked into Sophia's restaurant asking to play for food. 6 months of changes so profound that sometimes he still woke up wondering if it was all a dream. The restaurant was packed tonight, every table filled and a line outside despite the spring rain. The crowd was a mix of regulars who had been coming for decades and newcomers drawn by what had become something of a local legend. The classically trained pianist who had emerged from homelessness to bring music back into the world. Benjamin sat at the piano, not the old upright that had been there on that first night, but a beautiful baby grand that now occupied the corner of the restaurant. It had been a gift from an anonymous donor after the video of Benjamin playing went truly viral, reaching millions of views and catching the attention of classical music lovers around the world. He was dressed simply but neatly in dark pants and a blue button-down shirt, his hair trimmed and his face clean-shaven. The hollowness in his cheeks had filled out, and the haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by something calmer, more present. As his fingers moved across the keys, playing a piece by Schubert, he caught Sophia's eye across the room. She smiled at him, that warm smile that had become as much a part of his new life as the music itself. She still wore her reading glasses on a chain around her neck, still moved between tables with practiced ease, but there was a lightness to her step these days. Angelo sat at his usual table near the piano, nodding in time with the music. At 82, his health had improved remarkably in the past months. His doctor claimed it was the new medication, but Angelo insisted it was the music. Better than any pill, he would say. Benjamin concluded the piece with a flourish, and the restaurant erupted in applause. He acknowledged it with a small nod. He was still getting used to being visible again after so many years of trying to disappear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice stronger now, more confident, "I'd like to play something new for you tonight. It's a piece I've been working on for the past few months." A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd. Benjamin's original compositions had become a highlight for regular patrons. "This one is called Asking for Food," he said, with a meaningful glance toward Sophia. "It's dedicated to the people who saw something in me when I couldn't see it in myself." He began to play, and the restaurant fell silent. The piece started simply, with a hesitant, almost fragile melody that spoke of uncertainty and loss. Gradually, it built in complexity and confidence, weaving themes of hope among the darker notes until it blossomed into something rich and full of life. It told his story without words, the fall, the struggle, and the unexpected second chance. At the next table, a music professor from the local university wiped tears from her eyes. 2 tables over, a young couple held hands, their dinner forgotten as they listened. Near the door, Tino was filming, as he often did these days for the restaurant's social media accounts, which had exploded in popularity. As the final notes faded, there was that moment of sacred silence Benjamin had come to treasure, the space between the end of the music and the world rushing back in, before thunderous applause filled the room. Several people rose to their feet. After his set, Benjamin made his way to the back of the restaurant where a young woman waited nervously, clutching a violin case. Lucia was 16, with dark curly hair and serious eyes. one of 8 students Benjamin now taught twice a week at the community center downtown. "Ready?" he asked her. She nodded, though her knuckles were white around the handle of her case. "I think so, Mr. Reynolds." "Remember," he said gently, "music isn't about being perfect. It's about being present, about connecting." They had practiced the duet for weeks, a simplified arrangement of Bach that Benjamin had created specifically for her skill level. It would be her first public performance. As they moved to the piano, Benjamin caught sight of a familiar face near the bar. Dr. Hernandez, the therapist who had been working with him since January, gave him an encouraging nod. Their weekly sessions had been challenging but healing, helping Benjamin finally confront the demons that had driven him from his promising career into a spiral of depression, substance abuse, and eventually homelessness. The restaurant quieted as Benjamin introduced Lucia and explained that she would be joining him for a piece. He could see her trembling slightly as she raised her violin, but when they began to play, something magical happened. Her nervousness melted away, replaced by the joy of creation. She wasn't perfect. There were a few missed notes, a slight hesitation in one passage, but the emotion in her playing was genuine and touching. When they finished, Lucia's parents, who had been watching anxiously from their table, were the first to leap to their feet in applause. The young girl's face flushed with pride as she took a small bow. "That's how it starts," Benjamin told her quietly as they walked back to where her parents waited. "That feeling right there, that's what keeps bringing you back to music, no matter what happens." Later, after the last customers had left and the staff was cleaning up, Sophia brought Benjamin a cup of tea and sat beside him at the piano. "You look tired," she said, her eyes concerned. "You've been pushing yourself hard lately." Benjamin sipped the tea gratefully. "Good tired, the kind that means you've done something worthwhile." Sophia nodded in understanding. "Your new place is working out?" 2 months ago, Benjamin had moved into a small apartment just 3 blocks from the restaurant. It wasn't fancy, just a studio with a kitchenette and a bathroom. But it was his, paid for with the money he earned from his nightly performances at the restaurant, his teaching, and the small fund that had been established by classical music lovers who had seen his viral video and wanted to support his comeback. "It's perfect," he assured her. "Still feels strange sometimes having my own key, my own space." "And the offers?" she asked carefully. "Have you decided?" Benjamin's reemergence into the music world had not gone unnoticed by his former colleagues. There had been offers, tentative at first, then increasingly serious. A small recital at a local church, a guest appearance with the city's chamber orchestra. Most recently, an invitation to perform a full concert at his alma mater Juilliard in the fall. "I'm still thinking," he said, running his fingers lightly over the keys. "Part of me wants to say yes to everything, to dive back in. But another part is afraid," Sophia finished for him. He nodded. "Not of playing. That fear is gone. But of going back to that world completely. The pressure, the expectations. The person I was then, he didn't handle it well." "You're not the same person now," Sophia reminded him gently. "No," Benjamin agreed. "I'm not." The door to the restaurant opened and they both looked up, surprised. The closed sign had been turned hours ago. A tall man with silver hair and kind eyes stood in the doorway, slightly damp from the rain. Benjamin felt his heart skip a beat as recognition dawned. "Professor Walsh," he said, rising to his feet. The older man smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "Hello, Benjamin. It's been a long time." Robert Walsh had been Benjamin's mentor at Juilliard, the teacher who had shaped not only his technique but his understanding of what music could be and do. They hadn't spoken since Benjamin's disappearance 3 years ago. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Professor Walsh said, looking between Benjamin and Sophia. "I saw the videos, of course. Everyone has. But I wanted to hear you play in person, to see for myself that you were really back." Benjamin felt a complex mix of emotions: joy, anxiety, gratitude, shame. "I'm still finding my way back," he said honestly. Professor Walsh nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's how it should be. A journey, not a destination." He paused. "I've been following your story these past months. What you're doing here." He gestured around the restaurant. "It's special. Real. More meaningful in many ways than concert halls and standing ovations." Benjamin felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. Thank you for saying that. That doesn't mean you shouldn't consider coming back to those concert halls sometimes, the professor added with a small smile. On your own terms, of course, when you're ready. As they talked into the night, Benjamin realized that the pieces of his life, past and present, struggle and triumph, were finally beginning to harmonize. The man who had walked into Sophia's restaurant 6 months ago asking to play for food had been a shadow of himself, hollowed out by loss and despair. The man sitting at the piano tonight was whole again, scarred certainly, but stronger for having been broken and rebuilt. Tomorrow, he would teach his students at the community center. The day after, he would play again at the restaurant. And in the fall, perhaps, he would return to Juilliard, not as the prodigy he had once been, but as someone with a deeper understanding of both music and humanity. His journey had taught him that true gifts aren't meant to be hidden away or protected. They're meant to be shared, to nourish others just as he had been nourished by the kindness of strangers who became family. And in that sharing, they grow stronger, more resilient, more beautiful. The music that had saved him would continue to do so, one note at a time,